Time had settled into the floorboards, into the faded wallpaper, into the dust that floated in thin ribbons beneath the single cracked window. The old crime scene was no longer taped off, no longer discussed, no longer part of anyone's daily worry. It stood in the quiet of an abandoned house on Devereux Lane, just outside Lafayette, where the air still held the faint memory of perfume, rainwater, and unopened letters. The room felt paused rather than emptied, as if the clock had simply been asked to stop and obey. The investigator, now older, stepped back into it with the same silent restraint he'd worn decades earlier, except something in his posture, something unreadably still, implied the weight of a forgotten truth. Her name had once circulated in newspapers across Louisiana. Alia Marenne, 27 years old, daughter of a local gallery owner, graduate of Tulane, known for her calm voice and thoughtful sketches of the bayou. She had lived in this house only 10 months before she disappeared. Not vanished dramatically, not spotlighted on radio programs, but simply gone in a way that left the town frozen in polite uncertainty. No one wanted to say anything concrete. No one wanted to believe anything shaped like certainty. At the time, that silence had been treated as consideration. Now, returning to the space, the investigator recognized it as something else entirely, a blankness too easy, too neat. He moved slowly, as though the dust itself were listening. The boards beneath his shoes gave soft murmurs, not creaks of alarm but careful sighs. He had requested no team, no cameras, no updated reports. He did not need them anymore. What remained of the case lived here, in the light that slanted across the carpet, in the single photograph still pinned to the faded corkboard by a rustless tack. The edges of the photo had curled inward, protective. It showed Alia seated at the counter of a local bookshop, eyes distant, posture composed. Nothing dramatic, nothing warning. Her quiet presence was the only detail. He remembered the file that had once sat on his desk, 32 pages of interviews, neighborhood notes, statements that said everything and nothing at once. He had copied each detail down to the scent of jasmine she favored. Yet within all that information, nothing shifted. No thread tugged the case forward. The scene had been logged, photographed, sealed, and released. And then, like a door deliberately left ajar, it had been forgotten. Now, as he opened the narrow drawer of the oak desk again, the air inside seemed cooler. Paper, still crisp despite time, rested in a neat pile. He slid the top sheet free, typed lines precise, controlled. A receipt from a framing studio dated 2 days before her disappearance. He had missed it then, not because it was hidden but because it was too plain, too ordinary. The studio was still open on the edge of town, a place of glass panels, quiet clerks, and frames that smelled of varnish. At the time, he had assumed she planned to frame one of her sketches. Nothing suspicious, nothing that hinted at urgency. The investigator traced a finger over the studio owner's signature, then released a slow breath, remembering the voice that had once answered his questions with nearly invisible hesitation. She only ordered one frame, small, not her usual, the owner had said. For what? A photograph, I think, she didn't explain. He had never asked which photograph, never pressed. The town had preferred gentleness, and he had matched it without question. In the attic stairwell, a faint draft lifted fragments of insulation and paper. The house was empty but not undone. He stepped upward with the quiet of someone handling memory. The attic door opened with a soft push, not resistance but permission. He paused at the threshold. Something settled in him, not dread, not emotion, just a still alignment of thought. The attic was cleaner than any other part of the house. Dust, yes, but organized dust. Boxes labeled in her handwriting. A single trunk lined with cedar. The investigator approached without hurry. The lid lifted easily. Inside, wrapped in delicate tissue, lay the frame she had ordered. A modest square of dark wood, corners mitered with quiet precision. The glass was intact, and inside, instead of art or a landscape sketch, was a photograph he had never seen before. It showed two figures near the bayou dock at dusk. Alia, unmistakable, her gaze steady. Beside her stood someone turned slightly away from the camera, a man in formal attire, expression soft, hand extended just enough to suggest familiarity. No date written, no note attached. The investigator studied the edges of the print. On the back, in Alia's handwriting, calm, unmistakable, was a single line. For truth later, not now. He closed the trunk gently. The attic air felt heavier, though not in an alarming sense, more like a truth settling into position after years of waiting. Downstairs, he unfolded the earlier file and inserted the photograph among the original pages. Everything instantly rearranged, silently, logically. The neatness of the original investigation had left no place for this quiet link. Logic had not failed then. It had not been fully used. He remembered the statements from that time, especially the housekeeper who had worked for Alia's father. Her voice had trembled only once, when she mentioned a guest who visited quietly, always late afternoon. No record, no name, just a presence. "He spoke like someone who didn't want to stay long," she said. "How many times?" "3, I think, maybe 4. He had written the detail down, then filed it under social visits. Now, in the silence of the old house, he understood. The photograph was the missing bridge, not because of romance or suspicion, but because of timing. The man's presence matched precisely the days before the framing receipt. Alia had preserved more than an image, she had preserved context. He swept the room with his gaze, not searching, simply absorbing. The dust held no hostility, no dark aura, just time, layered and patient. Under the loose floorboard near the wardrobe, exactly where a previous note had referenced a slight unevenness, the investigator found a small sealed envelope. No tape, only a clean fold. Inside, a single page in Alia's handwriting. "If truth arrives in quiet form, let it, no rush, no force. I trusted stillness, I trusted sequence." No accusation, no fear, just a statement of her belief that clarity would come not through leaps but through steps. The investigator returned the letter to its envelope, smoothing the fold. The floorboards whispered again as he stood. Outside, the late afternoon light stretched across the backyard, brushing the rusted swing set and the fence that now leaned with the easy fatigue of years. A cicada hummed. A car passed on the distant road, not slowing. The town had moved forward. Lives continued, businesses opened and closed, conversations shifted to other names, newer events. Yet the house remained, and with it, the quiet clarity that Alia had left behind. He walked back to the photograph pinned on the corkboard downstairs, studied her expression again, not alarmed, not distressed, simply composed. The world had interpreted her silence as disappearance, but perhaps, he thought, it had simply been preparation. He heard the rustle of leaves through the window. The dust motes drifted in golden suspension. Nothing here pushed toward closure, nothing demanded final declaration. The truth had arrived exactly as she had written, later, quiet. He opened his notebook, leather, worn, practical, and wrote only 3 lines. She knew. She left record. Sequence restores. No flourish, no emotional surge, just fact aligning with patience. When he closed the notebook, the house felt lighter, as if acknowledging that its role was nearly complete. But he did not step out yet. Instead, he remained in the stillness, absorbing the sense that resolution in this case was not triumph, not relief, not even revelation. It was simply the completion of a circle drawn long ago by a steady hand. Alia had not vanished, she had arranged. He looked once more at the photograph of the man whose face was turned just enough to avoid full identification. Logic would continue from here, through records, travel logs, discreet inquiries. No spectacle, no public announcement. Truth would remain quiet as she intended. The investigator stood alone in the fading light, the air gently shifting around him. Justice would be procedural, calm, without audience. But something in the room, a faint trace of jasmine or memory, or the simple acknowledgement of her final note, remained human, unmechanical, unfiled. He closed the door behind him with care, leaving nothing disturbed. The house sat behind him now, but the atmosphere of it, dust, quiet perfume that seemed to remain purely out of loyalty, followed without pressure. The investigator reached his car with a slow, measured step, carrying the envelope, the framed photograph, and the copy of the file. The trunk clicked shut with restrained care. Even outside, the air felt like the attic, still waiting. He drove toward town along the narrow road, lined with moss and the faint murmur of water threading through ditch channels. Louisiana's summer light softened toward evening, shadows stretching tall and thin. The radio remained off. Conversation would have broken something essential in the way thought arranged itself now. At the Central Archive building, a low brick structure behind the municipal office, unchanged since the early 80s, he stepped inside and nodded to the lone clerk. No greeting, no exchange beyond acknowledgement. They understood each other through history, not speech. He requested the registry logs from 1980 to 1983. The clerk slid them forward without interruption. The books were grainy with pencil entries, embossed labels still intact. He lifted his glasses from his coat pocket and settled them carefully. The quiet of the room encouraged an almost monastic focus. The man in the photograph. He could not name him yet, but his posture, his formal jacket, the way he leaned slightly toward Alia rather than away. It suggested familiarity deeper than casual visit, yet not declared in public form. Not a neighbor, not a colleague. Someone who belonged to a space not easily categorized. He turned the registry page with slow intention. Under guest entries, one line repeated over several months. El Cairo, gallery appointment private. No address, no official designation, only that phrase. Private. The loop of the C in Cairo was the same shape as the signature on the framing receipt. Not identical ink, not identical pen, but identical handwriting balance, an almost architectural steadiness. He placed the frame on the table beside the log, the photograph facing upward between pages like a whispered connection. Alia in the image looked not posed but aware. Her expression did not reach toward the camera. It looked past it, toward whatever moment had preceded the shutter. If the man beside her was El Cairo, then the framing order, the visits, the single envelope in the floorboard formed a quiet trail, not dramatic, not scattered, perfectly sequential. He wrote one word in his notebook, Cairo. Then added a date, the same day as her last confirmed appearance at the bookshop, the exact day the photograph must have been taken. The town had spoken of her last week as uneventful. They had assumed her calm was emptiness. They had not recognized preparation. He requested the private gallery ledger next. The clerk retrieved it reluctantly, not hesitation, simply care. The ledger, bound in deep burgundy leather, held 30 years of names, acquisitions, temporary exhibitions, and private showings. He turned to the page near the center, lightly marked by a small blue ribbon. There it was. Appointment Alia Marenne. Guest El Cairo. Purpose, review of personal commission. Not sale, not purchase, review. The word implied revision, selection, contemplation, a project already in motion. The investigator paused, letting the details settle. Alia had known him not through sudden encounter but through continued artistic connection. Not relationship in romantic shorthand, but collaboration. If she was framing a photograph, and he was noted for a commission, then the moment captured at the bayou dock was not leisure. It was context for something she intended to finalize, quietly, on her own terms. He looked again at the background in the photo. The faint reflection of the water line, a moored fishing vessel, and behind them, a simple wooden post with a hand-painted marker. Marenne Est. Family property, her father's original land, a place that existed long before she moved into the Devereux Lane house, a private dock, a space no passerby would have reached without invitation. She had chosen the frame size deliberately. Not a full portrait, not a landscape print, something meant to sit on a desk or be delivered discreetly. A record of a moment, proof without accusation. He exhaled, calm but sharpened. Logic slid forward another inch. Later, not now. The words on the back of the photograph continued to echo, not as mystery but as instruction. She had waited for the correct witness, not the swift one. He closed the ledger gently and returned it. No questions from the clerk, no summary offered. He left the building with the same silent precision, stepping into dusk. Lakeview Road carried him toward the water's edge. Cypress trees lined the horizon, their reflections quiet on the surface. Fireflies surfaced in slow intervals, blinking like coded signals. The dock in the photograph waited somewhere ahead, unchanged by decades, untouched by the town's shift toward gas stations and strip malls. When he reached it, the wood planks gave beneath his weight, not unstable, simply aged. The air smelled of water, cedar, and something faintly floral, the same trace that had lingered in her house. He stood at the precise position captured in the photograph, aligning his stance with the angle of the camera. The perspective revealed what the image hid. Behind the boat, half camouflaged by reeds, was another path. Narrow, barely used but maintained. He walked it slowly. It led to a small boathouse with a locked side door. He pressed his palm against it. The wood was unwarped. The lock opened not with force but with the same key that had fit the trunk in her attic. A match he had tested, not expecting it to align so precisely. Inside, no clutter, no dust, not abandoned, preserved. A table stood near the window, where light from the lake filtered across its surface. On it rested a second frame, slightly larger than the first, empty except for a backing board and a notation pinned to it. See, final draft, awaiting return. See Caro. So he had intended to return. She had prepared his copy, her copy, evidence of a collaboration that was never meant to vanish. The investigator moved no papers, touched no tools. He absorbed the arrangement. Nothing here suggested rupture. Nothing suggested alarm. This was a workspace of intention, paused but not broken. He lifted a small notebook from the corner, its leather worn but intact. No lock this time. Inside, sketches of the bayou, horizon lines, reeds, the faint outline of two figures. Alia always in quiet presence, her posture reading not as muse but as equal contributor. Caro's script appeared beneath some sketches, notes about lighting, framing, timing of late-day color. Their work was not secret. It was simply unpublicized. A final page stood out. Not sketch, not technical note, just a date and a phrase. Return after exhibition. Confirm placement. No tension. No coded meaning. A practical instruction for a project near completion. The investigator closed the notebook and returned it exactly. He looked out toward the lake again, letting the water and dusk settle his thoughts. If Caro had returned and found her gone, the project would have halted without closure. Not abandoned by choice, simply paused by absence. And the town, unaware of their collaboration, had assumed disappearance meant separation from meaning. Yet her presence remained everywhere, quiet, intact. Later, not now. She had anticipated all of this. That truth would surface when patience matured. Back at his car, he wrote a new line in his notebook. Not unsolved, unfinished. The distinction mattered. She had not left clues, she had left continuations. The frame, the photograph, the second workspace, the quiet ledger entries, all parts of something steady, almost serene in its planning. He drove to the final location on his list. The gallery once owned by her father, now maintained by a distant relative. The interior smelled of varnish and linen canvas. A single light remained on in the back room. The caretaker looked up as he entered, offering a nod of familiarity. "Here for the Marenne holdings, I assume," she said softly. "Just records," he answered. She handed over a folder already prepared, as if expecting his arrival without explanation. Inside were catalog cards of Alia's work, including one titled, Bayou Sequence, Study 4. Sold privately, buyer El Caro. Not hidden, simply unreported beyond art circles. The town had never bothered to ask, content with polite distance. He looked at the notation beneath the sale line. Intended pairing pending artist approval. Pairing. 2 frames, 2 photographs, 2 artists. A diptych but not displayed. One in her attic, one awaiting return in the boathouse studio. The unfinished project was the case, and the case was not about crime. It was about completion delayed by circumstance. He closed the file gently. A quiet understanding settled in him. What everyone had interpreted as disappearance was not retreat. It was scheduling, a pause in a collaborative timeline that life simply interrupted. The lights in the gallery dimmed slightly as evening deepened. The caretaker remained silent, sensing resolution not as triumph but as alignment. He stepped outside once more and looked toward the horizon. No revelation demanded announcement. No public ceremony waited. The truth had arrived the way she asked, later, quiet. He understood now why she left no declaration, only sequence. Some truths do not need audience, they just need arrival. As he drove back toward Devereux Lane, streetlights flicked on in slow succession, casting simple pools of light across pavement. The house would be dark again, still, unchanged. But something inside it would have shifted, not the dust, not the walls, but the invisible thread that connected its past to its present. Justice was not the word for this. It was something calmer, something like acknowledgement. No headline, no broadcast, just a quiet nod between past and present. He parked and sat without leaving the car, letting the night hold its shape. The photograph, still in the frame beside him, reflected faint starlight. Alia's gaze remained steady, composed, assured. She had not asked for resolution. She had simply arranged it. Night did not rush, and neither did he. The street outside the Marenne house lay still beneath lamplight, the glow soft enough to make the air seem painted. He stepped out of the car, holding the frame against his chest, careful not to smudge the glass. The key turned in the lock with the same old quiet it had given him earlier. No echo, just acknowledgement. Inside, the house greeted him not with memory but with acceptance. Dust continued its slow, drifting orbit. Edges of furniture remained softened by time, and the scent of jasmine lingered with the same undeniable calm. He set the frame on the desk. the place where the original file once rested decades ago, aligning it with the exact corner where her notes had been found. The investigator stood motionless for a full minute, allowing his attention to settle on the simplest detail. In the photograph, her shoulders leaned not toward the man beside her but toward the horizon behind him. She had been focused on something beyond the moment, beyond the image itself. The file, the trunk, the ledger, the studio notes, all had confirmed it. Her quiet was intention, not disappearance. He returned to the attic, his steps soft, mindful. The trunk waited with the same calm dignity. He placed the second frame beside the first, matching their angle, their edges, their patient balance. Now the diptych existed again, one frame with the photograph, one without in preparation, paused but finally acknowledged. He sat on the attic floor, back against the wall, notebook on his knee. The house made no sound. Even the wind softened itself in respect. He traced again the line on the photograph's reverse. For truth later, not now. It read not like warning but like timing. She had trusted the sequence more than the urgency. His pen hovered over the page before committing words. Truth delivered. Work intact. Time fulfilled. The attic light dimmed through the small window, filtered in a pale ribbon across cedar lining. He had solved cases before, some heavy, some staged, some involving half-told accounts. This, however, felt different, not for its difficulty but for its order. There had been no clash, no chase, no hidden corner. Just patience, left suspended until someone cared to follow it without hurry. He recalled the housekeeper's earlier voice, its hesitation not from alarm but from respect. She spoke of her work often, she had said quietly. With who? A gentleman. They never stayed long in conversation. They simply understood the work. Understood. A word that had been too subtle at the time, too gentle for investigation, yet essential now. The investigator rose and descended the stairs once again. The house had no need to hide detail anymore. Everything had surfaced, not dramatically but inevitably. He returned to the main room and began sorting the items with deliberate precision. Letters, file copies, the framed photograph, her envelope from beneath the floorboard. Nothing out of place, nothing reinterpreted beyond what she left. He reached for the letter again, reading the line that had repeated itself in his mind all afternoon. If truth arrives in quiet form, let it. A simple statement. Yet in its modest phrasing it guided every step of this reinvestigation. She had predicted the weight, the silence, the eventual clarity, not through suspicion but through confidence in her process. He opened her notebook once more, focusing not on sketches but on margins, the way she dated her notes with small circles, always in the lower right corner. He noticed now that the date on the photograph aligned with the margin note from her project entry. Bayou series, final collaborative day. Not coded, not concealed, simply recorded. He left the attic with both frames secured and stepped out into the hallway, where moonlight stretched across the floor like a measured path. When he reached the door, he paused, taking in the weightless hush of the space, not empty, not abandoned, just fulfilled. The town had searched for questions all those years ago, interpreting quiet as mystery. They had not understood that stillness can be strategy, that absence can be interval rather than ending. Back outside, the air wrapped around him with a softness only Louisiana nights know. Warm, steady, rich with the hush of water somewhere beyond the fields. He drove not to headquarters but to the lake one final time. The dock welcomed his return with the same calm wood underfoot, and the stars reflected faintly in the water. He stood where the camera once stood, where Alia and her collaborator had captured the unfinished moment. Now it was finished, not publicly, not with declaration, but in alignment. He placed the second empty frame on the edge of the dock, not as abandonment but as recognition. It was not meant for his possession. It belonged to the project itself, to the partnership that had stayed still since 1983. The lake held its breath, or perhaps echoed his. He reopened the notebook and added two final observations beneath his earlier lines. Collaboration, uninterrupted by time. Legacy, unspoken yet entire. The night deepened but remained gentle. No urgency, no rush to file reports before sunrise. This case, if it could be called that now, needed nothing from the world except acknowledgement. The truth was not spectacle. It was continuity restored. He sat at the edge of the dock, feet still, posture composed, mirroring the calm presence in her photograph. He allowed himself one quiet moment of reflection, not emotion, not triumph, simply understanding. The town would never speak about this in dramatic tones. It would not become headline, not retold in classrooms or coffee counters. It would remain exactly what she intended, a quiet resolution, delivered without noise. She had not vanished from her work. She had not dissolved from her timeline. She had paused, trusting someone would one day respect the stillness enough to continue. Later, not now. The words returned, unfaded by decades, precise as the day she wrote them. The investigator rose slowly, carrying only the notebook back with him, leaving the frames where they belonged, one in her house, one at her dock, each now in rightful context. On the drive back, he passed through streets that slept without concern. Porch lights blinked gently, dogs curled on steps, storefront windows reflected nothing but empty road. The town did not need to know the details. They were not kept from it by secrecy, only by the fact that truth sometimes prefers quiet. He parked in front of his office building but did not enter. There was nothing to file, not in the formal sense. The case, structurally, offered no crime, no event requiring closure. It offered completion. He leaned against the car and wrote with calm finality. Case returned to its origin. Wind moved through live oak branches above him, leaves stirring in slow motion, as if acknowledging an arrival long delayed. He closed the notebook and slipped it into his coat, not for storage, but for remembrance. The night had thinned into early morning softness. No light yet on the horizon, just a calm prelude of gray-blue air. He looked once toward Devereux Lane in the distance, invisible through trees yet present in thought. The house would remain there, quiet, intact, freed of question. The investigator stepped into his car with the steady composure of someone who had not solved something, but completed it. No applause, no verdict, no tally of right and wrong. Just truth, patient and exact. He drove home, windows up, radio silent, letting the soft geometry of dawn take shape across the windshield. The world, he understood, did not always require resolution to be loud. Sometimes it required only this: an unhurried return, a gentle alignment, a final recognition between a name carried in silence and a project finally acknowledged. Justice did what it always does, persisted, procedural, patient. But something more enduring remained in the quiet after. She had trusted stillness, and it answered her.